Welcome back, everybody, to another No Days studio session. Today I am going to continue with the project that I started yesterday, but before we get into all of that, I guess I should probably introduce myself just in case you don't know who I am. My name is Carrie. I am a teaching artist based in Lincoln, Nebraska, and I am the owner of No Days Adhesives after working for 10 years with the No Days Adhesives guys in kind of the technical support and video creation, content creation kind of aspect. I acquired the business from them recently in January. I am a teaching artist. I travel a lot. I also teach locally here in Lincoln, Nebraska at a local studio. And today I've got a project to share with you that I'm continuing to work on from a session where I went live yesterday. So if you were here yesterday, then you saw part of the project. Like you are up to speed. This is how far we've come, and I'm not going to tip this up yet because it's not glued down. I've got everything cut and ready to move on, but basically the idea is I've got these lovely little mosaic mirrors. I've got 2 of them, and I really want to display them upstairs. I've got a nice wall that's waiting for them, but I want a grouping of them, and I wanted one to be bigger, kind of the accent piece, and kind of tie it all together. So yesterday, in the previous live session, I went through creating the pattern because I knew the design, but I didn't have a pattern for the larger size. So we went through creating the pattern, and I've got that here for you. So you can kind of see the pattern that we started to create yesterday. And I just want to finish up a little bit of yesterday's class, I guess, yesterday's demo, right? With the final part that I wanted to show you, because I had talked about how you can use clear stained glass as your pattern to trace things around if you didn't have, paper or cardstock. I typically don't make patterns for when I'm cutting. A lot of people will, like if they're doing stained glass, they'll take their pattern and they'll cut out every single piece, and then they'll glue that or trace it on every piece of glass, and then they'll cut. And that takes a really long time to do, and it's just this extra step that you really don't need to do. But sometimes you've got glass that is opaque and you can't see through it. So in that case, if I'm trying to cut on my pattern, you can see there's no way I can see through that. If I had the light table, which I did yesterday, and I showed you how to cut all these pieces on the light table, you can use a light table. But if you don't have a light table at home, then it makes it a little bit more difficult, which is why you cut every single piece out of paper and then cut it on your glass. So I highly encourage you to look into small light table setups if you're a stained glass or mosaic artist that uses patterns like this frequently, because it's going to save you so much time. But the stained glass studio where I work, we have a ton of clear stained glass scrap, and a lot of it is this size, and this is plenty big for this last little piece that I needed. I found some in the garage today while I was cleaning. Like yesterday, I knew I had some over here somewhere, but I wasn't sure where, and that's why I didn't show this part to you, so I wanted to just show you how I do this. Now notice I can see through the glass today, so I don't need to trace everything out with a Sharpie, right? I'm gonna just cut over the line with it. And there's my pistol grip glass cutter. Again, open my hand, put it right there, close my grip, and pew, 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 I'm ready to go. I'm gonna take this, and I'm not gonna have the pattern like this and try and cut sideways, because that is ergonomically incorrect. You're gonna put a lot of extra pressure on your body parts. Don't be hard on your body while you're doing this work. Work smarter, not harder, right? And if you'll remember from yesterday, I want to cut inside the line because that line represents my grout line-ish, and I'm going to cut inside so I can avoid having to grind too much, hopefully. And when I'm cutting a pattern piece, especially if this piece is cut wrong in any way, then I really am going to have to grind it, because if I'm using that as my pattern piece, I don't want there to be any error, because there might be a little bit of error on all these pieces as I'm cutting them, but on the pattern piece, I want that to be as exact as possible, because otherwise I'm cutting a whole bunch of pieces wrong. And when I'm cutting with the running pliers, remember I want the screw side up. I like to mark my tool with an up and the line. This is a trick that I learned at one of the studios that I went and visited. It's really handy. So if you hold it upside down and it says no, glass cutter is telling you, or your running pliers are telling you, that's not the right way to do it. All right, so see, I'm going to line it up again, and then I can go in here and cut this piece here, and I really want this template piece to be as perfect as possible, right? Because I don't want to grind it. I can grind it if necessary, but I won't show you that part because we're going to get into so much grinding of glass that you don't need to see me grinding a pattern piece as well. Tonight's session is mainly about the glass grinder because the pattern pieces that I cut out, they're almost ready to glue down, but they don't quite fit. I think most of them, like the pieces, there's a little bit here or there, but especially this little part that goes in there, I think, you know, I got off in a couple little places. And normally with a mosaic, you don't have to worry about this kind of grinding, but this specific style of mosaic that I'm doing is going to require the pieces to fit really snug. Notice when I'm breaking, I'm coming over here to the Morton board that's underneath my grinder because I don't want to end up with glass shards in front of me on the workstation. So here is my piece now, right? Okay. Now, when I was talking to you yesterday, I thought perhaps that these pieces were exactly the same because theoretically that top is exactly the same there, but it turns out that it's not quite the same. It's a little bit different. So when I ended up making another piece here, I labeled the front side with the 3 because then I could move this over and see. Did I move that over and see? It's not, well, it's pretty close. Gosh, this one's even better than the one I cut yesterday. Maybe it is about the same. It just looked like it was a hair off. See that? So I wanted to make sure that both sides really matched up. Geez, maybe I should have used tonight's piece as my pattern piece, huh? I guess we'll find out. Well, you know, I wanted to grind for you guys, so there's no getting around that. Anyway, then once I have this piece cut, I can take and I can go ahead and trace out my pieces on my piece of glass and then cut the glass out from there, right? So I was able to get all 8 pieces that I need out of a piece that was about this size by kind of squeezing them in there. And this is why I like to trace out my pattern pieces on small pieces of glass specifically, because if I don't, then I might run out of glass. And for this project, quite honestly, every piece of glass that I used was just the right amount. So I didn't really have any to spare. If I would have cut any of these wrong, I would have had to modify my pattern, which is no big deal. If I would have cut one of these petals wrong, it probably would have meant that I either found another piece of glass in that same color or go back in with mosaic nippers and just cut the pieces to fit. You know, I already had the outside pieces on most of these, so I could cut them apart and kind of space them and make a different pattern that way. So anyway, that's how I went about that. I traced all my pieces down there and then I figured out how to cut them apart. All right, so that's just the last little bit from yesterday's video so that you all know what went on there. Now we're going to be talking about grinding glass and glass grinders and what to do when you first get your glass grinder. It just so happens that I have, sorry for any noise here, that I have one of my glass grinders over there didn't have a grinder bit in it. And the reason why I think is because it's specifically loud and noisy when it has this, lift this up, it's a special glass grinder that also has a disc in it, which is really great for cold working the edges of smaller fused glass pieces. It's a small, tiny version of a lap wheel. So if you can't afford a large lap wheel, and they get pretty expensive, you can always get a little lap wheel, and those work great. I would say for, you know, mostly jewelry projects, but even some 4-inch by 4-inch projects. I think I've actually done some 8-inch projects with the edge there too, but it gets a little bit hairy because it's such a small wheel. But don't worry about the grinding wheel right now. We'll talk about that later. What we're concerned about is the grinding bit. And grinder bits come in a variety of forms. You can get bigger ones that have a wider circumference, I guess, and smaller ones. The smaller ones will be able to get inside little teeny tiny portions even better. I've even got some in here, maybe it was in my other bag, that have just a little tiny bit, so you can actually use them for drilling as well if you don't have a Dremel. Oh, here it is. if you didn't have a Dremel, you could use some of these smaller bits and you would be able to use them like drills, right? That would give you a pretty big hole if you were going for that. So typically when I'm drilling a hole like that, I'll find a Dremel, a bit that can fit in my Dremel that's a hollow core. But this would work just as well, right? The other thing that's really nice about this, see how the curve on this one is much tighter, so you could make really intricate grinds into a piece of glass. So it's you could make little scallops in the edge of a piece. It's almost as versatile, not quite, but it would be a nice thing to have in your arsenal if you wanted to make some scalloped edges, decorative edges, not quite a ring saw type of edge, you know, because it would take a long time to grind through a piece of glass, but a ring saw is on my list of things that I would like to get, and we'll have a video of that eventually someday too. Here is this bit right here is a beveled bit. This one's really nice for if you are creating, like if you have thicker stained glass, you can grind down the edges so that it fits inside of your channel, but it also I found works well. I think this is the one, maybe it was the opposite of this one, that works well for creating a channel for wire wrapping pieces too, if you were making jewelry out of thicker fused glass or thicker glass of any kind. But that's a little off topic. So anyway, I'm going to show you how this works, and I'm just going to go ahead and get my gloves on because this whole process is going to get a little bit messy. Some people like wearing gloves the whole time they're cutting because then you save yourself from any little bits of glass that might end up on the table. They don't end up in your hand, just the little tiny bits that I was cutting over the top there, right? The other thing is gloves are really nice for grinding because your hands are gonna get wet, and as we're grinding, this bit is gonna take and dig away at the glass and throw little tiny bits, like teeny tiny bits all over the place. So later you'll probably see a line across my apron here that shows you where the grinder bits were going. I've got a shield that I'm going to set up too right before I get ready to go. But initially I've got some anti-seize lubricant. We're going to use this on the shaft of our grinder here. This is going to allow us to take our bits on and off and interchange them really easily. It's really kind of a pain in the butt when you come to a point where either you need to change your drill bit out because you've lost a lot of its grinding capability. I had an older one here that I can kind of show you. After a while of grinding, you're going to wear down a section in the grinder, and you can kind of see that section where it's worn down a little bit. That one still has some use in it. There's another one over here that's got almost a bald spot. Actually, it does have it's a pretty good bald spot here, right? Like this spot here. I don't want to use the grinder bit in that section, so I would want to loosen it up and then move it up or down, because I don't know if you can, you probably can't see, but you can move this up or down. You've got like a 1/2 inch, looks like, right? 1/2 inch, maybe almost 3/4 of an inch, 5/8 of an inch of little diamond grinding wheel area here. So if you get bald there, you can move the bit up or down on the shaft to center it with your table, because typically what's going to happen is when you're grinding, you're going to hold the glass against the table. Unless you don't, which I also sometimes don't, but initially when you're starting to grind, it's a good idea to do that, just so you can kind of get a feel for how to use the grinder, and then after you get a little bit better, you can pick it up and move it around. So the other thing that I want to make sure that I'm doing is I don't want to use a really aggressive grinder bit. When you're working with stained glass, it doesn't matter as much because you're going to cover the edges with lead or with foil. But with mosaics, we're not covering the edges. So if you use a really aggressive grinder bit, you're going to end up with chips along your glass, and those are going to be obvious after you grout. You're going to see little chips along the edge. And I have some iridescent glass here, so if I get any little chips on this glass, that irid coating is going to come off as well, and it's also going to be noticeable. So I don't want an aggressive grinder bit. And you can tell in the package when you buy them. I think there's like different coarseness levels, so you can figure out what kind of, you know, what coarseness you want. And I usually go for fine or medium, I think. But anyway, here's the grinder bit I'm going to be using. First thing I want to do is put a little bit of this anti-seize lubricant on the shaft so that it's easy to change this bit in and out. Another trick that we'll often do at the studio is we have a little bit of wax. It's like those earpiece things, those things that you put in your ears when you go to concerts and you want to protect your earring, right? Your hearing. Ear plugs, wax ear plugs. There we go. Or for swimming, you can take a little bit of that and you'll put it on the top of this after we get our bit secured. And that's going to prevent water, because see the bit's open on the top side, so that's going to prevent water from sneaking down inside there. It's going to help us so that we don't end up with a drill bit or a grinder bit that doesn't come off of the grinder. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and attach this grinder bit. There's a little Allen wrench that generally comes with your grinder bit, and there's a little screw over here on the side that your Allen wrench is going to fit in. And as you tighten it up, you might be able to see, as you tighten it up, that drill or that little screw is going to meet, and there's a flat side on your shaft. So we're going to line this up. The flat side's over here. I'm going to go ahead and put this in here. And you can kind of see that right there. I'm going to try and level this up with my table. Maybe I'll turn this sideways so you guys can kind of see what I'm doing there, right? So I'm going to bring this in. The flat side's over there. Turn it so that it's this way. The flat side's over there. I'm going to put my bit down and I'm going to try and level it a little bit with the table. I don't want it to be up higher so that when I'm grinding, the glass goes against that brass part. The brass part does not have any grinding capabilities. It's the silver part that has the diamond grinding stuff, coating, okay? All right, so I'm going to give this a twist, and at some point it's going to tighten up. I'm just going to hand tighten it. I'm going to get it nice and secure because I don't want this to come loose while I'm grinding. So you've got your righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. So I'm finished with that. I'll go ahead and put this aside. Now my grinder bit is ready. I need some water in my reservoir. This particular grinder works with a reservoir. Some grinders have pumps in it, and they'll have an apparatus with a straw, a tube that comes up in the back, and it feeds in the back, and it shoots water on your grinder bit, which is really great, super handy. With those, the maintenance, sometimes you have to unplug your pump or the water has gone too low and you have to get it started again. And sometimes that's a little bit tricky. And we have those grinders available at the studio. So there's a chance that I'll show you all a video of that kind of grinder at some point. But for now, I'm going to show you with this guy that has the reservoir. We need to get the water in the reservoir up and around the grinder bit. So the water is going to help cool the glass as it grinds because we don't want it to get overly hot. That could potentially thermal shock. Chances are usually slim for that with the pieces that we're using. But the other thing is that there's glass dust, and we don't want that glass dust going airborne all over the place, right? So that water is going to help hold it, and the sponge is going to collect it as well. And afterwards, when we're done grinding, I might open it up and you may be able to see quite a bit of grinder gook. If not, I'll just take a picture and post it and put it in this video when it gets edited so that you can see how yummy the grinder gets down in the bottom. Now, I know some people take all that grinder dust and collect it and fuse it, but I typically throw it out, especially since I'm working with stained glass. It doesn't really do anything. I have seen some really cool fused glass little like rocky, puddly looking things that are really cool, but I'm not going to be doing that. All right, so now I'm ready to go, except I need to fill my reservoir. So I've got some water over here. You might notice, let me just show you again here, right here, this little guy. So because there's a disc here as well, this grinder uses the reservoir to feed water over the disc if you were grinding that. So there's this little plug here, and it may or may not actually work really well. There's this plug, and these little rubber bits that fill those holes are supposed to prevent the water from going out and over, but we'll see how well it works. This grinder I generally reserve for my disc grinding, so that's why I didn't have a bit on it. That's why I didn't have this extra piece that I had to go hunting for. But it's much cleaner and easier to show you than the other one, which actually really needs to be cleaned. So maybe we'll see how the night goes. If I feel like shuffling around and cleaning it, probably not. That'll probably be a separate video because it's not fun work. It's really dirty work. Anyway, I need to fill my reservoir. So I'm going to fill my reservoir, and I also want to make sure that my sponge gets wet, right? And this is why we usually put wax over the top of this, because the water can start to go down in there. And after a while, if you weren't changing out your bit frequently, it is going to seize up no matter how well you've prepared for it. So just something to keep in mind. And I don't see the water spilling over yet, but I want to kind of fill it up enough that I know that the bit, or the sponge is going to wick up the water and get it to the bit. As I'm grinding my glass, I'll probably have a little cup of water that I'll pour over the glass occasionally to help move some of that glass dust around. I have a shield. So this shield, you can kind of see, gets a little bit dirty. This is also going to catch all of the grinder dust that wants to fly out. So I put this up, and I keep it over the Morton surface so that the Morton surface is going to catch any excess liquid and keep my space all nice and tidy. Then what I like to do with this is take a sheet of glass and place it over the top surface here. Now, I have my glasses on, and that's going to prevent any of that grinder, like any of the stuff that's going to go flying. It's going to prevent it from going up in my eyes. But safety glasses don't protect from your nose or your mouth. A grinder shield is a really important thing to have, because those little tiny shards of glass that go flying, they're not necessarily dust, but they're sharp and they're little, and they can get stuck in your nose, and it doesn't feel good, and it takes a little while for it to work itself out. So always use a face shield of some sort over your grinder. This is my preferred setup if it's possible for you. This is my preferred setup because it allows me to get in here underneath. You'll end up actually seeing some of the grinder dust coming up underneath here, and you'll see what has actually been saved from my face with this shield. Here is my piece that I'm going to start with. Now, I don't want to start with my edge pieces because it makes no sense for me to work outwards in. I need to make sure that my inside pieces are all proper. So I'm going to go ahead and just get rid of all these green pieces for now. And I'm going to get rid of these pink pieces too. Now, I do have my pattern, and I could work on my pattern if I wanted to. But I'm just going to work directly on my piece here because I'm going to be able to see exactly where everything needs to fit. Now, when I'm looking at this piece, this point is hanging out over the edge. I don't know how well you can see that, but this point is hanging out over the edge. So there's something going on down here that I'm probably going to have to get rid of. These pieces aren't meeting, right? There's this spot right there where this glass is kind of poking out like that. So I've already taken my Sharpie and made a little mark. Basically what I'm doing is I'm visualizing, here's the center, and I want to make a mark that comes straight out on the center because I want these lines to basically, if we extended them, they would be a cross, right? And this line right over here, the edge of that piece looks good, but that piece doesn't. That piece looks a little wonky. So what I like to do is kind of just take one piece at a time and make everything fit as I go. One thing I want to point out that wasn't there before, I don't know if you can see it, there's in this area here, maybe you can see it, there's already some grinder dust popping up that way, right? So my face shield is doing its job. The only other thing I'm going to do right now, well, let's go back and test this pattern first, huh? So do a lot of this. If I had my pattern all drawn out in the paper and I was sure that the paper pattern was really good, I might use the paper pattern, but my paper pattern is not quite right just because these pieces are a little bit off. Maybe if I move it over a little bit. There we go. That one seems to fit better there. Just go over. That one seems to fit better there. Well, then maybe this one fits better here. I think my mirror wasn't quite centered. Well, that doesn't look too bad. So I'm going to go ahead and grind that. And actually, I wanted to show you something else while we're talking about grinding, because you don't necessarily need to use a grinder all the time. I have this carborundum stone. It's like a grinding stone, right? I don't know if you can see kind of, there we go, right? See that bit right there where it's just kind of this little flare that sticks out? Doesn't necessarily require a grinder. If you can use your carborundum stone, you can kind of right? So that was just a flare, and now that flare is gone. So you can use a grinding stone for some of this. You don't necessarily need a grinder all the time. If you were using a lot of this, I would probably put a face mask on and see all this little glass dust that ended up down there. You're going to be collecting a lot of glass shards. So just make sure you're in closed-toed shoes and you're not breathing this stuff in, right? I'm just going to go ahead and put that down on the Morton board. All right. The other thing is you don't want to do it over your substrate. I've prepped this substrate long ago with some No Days Mosaic adhesive, and I don't want to grind over the top of it because I'm going to end up with little glass shards in there, and then that would kind of defeat the purpose. The film, those glass shards, if they get in between your piece and your base, it's going to make it really hard for the glue to grab on. So that's why you don't want to end up with glass shards down there. Okay, so that's actually looking pretty darn good. That's pretty close there. There's a little bit here where I could take my stone and grind. I'm just going to see what else I might need the grinder for first, though. This guy right here, see how my grout line isn't quite right there? And let's see how this looks. Is that okay? Put that in there, see how that looks. Put that in there. Now over here, again, we can see somebody is out of line here. Who's out of line? So if I draw my line this way, it looks like this guy is actually out of line. So I'm going to go ahead and just grind off this little bit right there, right? And I've also got this this grout line there that has totally disappeared. So I want to also go in here and I'm going to grind a little bit away from this because I want that grout line to be nice and even all the way around. Might be... Remember, I'm going to do one piece at a time, but it looks like this piece here, even if I move it out a little bit, I kind of want to get rid of just a little tip there, and I could probably do that with breaker grozers too. So let's see. All right, so you might have seen me grinding all the way around some of these pieces, and that was a snap decision I made. This is a highly textured piece of glass, and what happens when you've got textured pieces of glass is when you cut, a lot of times it ends up with needly edges. And since I was grinding already, I figured I would just quickly, I don't push as I'm going into the grinder, I just kind of go along the edges really quick and smooth them out, and that prevents me from having any needly edges that might poke me when I grout. So figured I might as well do it since I'm grinding anyways. So let's take a look at our fit here. What does this look like now? This should look pretty darn good, I think. Sneak this in here. And some of you might be looking at my base and wondering, what is this black stuff that I've got in there? I'm also wondering, what is that black stuff that I've gotten in there, because it's been such a long time, but I think it's paint, and I think the reason that I did that is because I might have chipped some of the edges off the mirror coating underneath when I was cutting it. I think I might have actually ground some of it. So I decided that I would hit the underside with some black paint to hide the fact that there was no more mirror coating there, right? All right, so that's actually looking pretty good, don't you think? Right? So now I can think about these next pieces that are gonna go in, and these pieces don't fit quite as nicely as I want them to. Look at that piece. Look at the size of that grout line over there. And I think mostly it has to do with the point. So I think if I get rid of that point, I will have nice grout lines. So what I end up doing here, even though my piece might be cut to the T for the pattern, I'm gonna go in here and look at this piece, and I kind of pick it up, and see how I ended up taking that point and going over the top like that? Well, these pieces are where I want them to be. So what I do is I just kind of figure out where my grout line looks like it's going to be the right size, like the consistent size, right? And I make a mark, and then that one I can probably cut because it's way big. But this one over here, I'm going to take this. This might get a little confusing because I already have, like, there's a little bit of a mark there, right? So I'm just going to go like, let's see, I want to grind all the way to maybe there, I think. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to take my braiders and find that mark, straight line, and I'm just going to nip that across like that. Now there's just a tiny little area where I can go in there and straighten it out with the grinder, right? All right, so those are done, and I think you can start to see a little bit more now. All these little tiny bits that would normally come right up at my face while I'm grinding, that is why I've got this there. Kind of feel like I might just do the rest of this grinding without you guys. You've kind of seen what needs to happen, and you've seen how I go in there, make my marks, grind it. The next video will be me heat setting this, and I'll probably just grout it right away. Hope everybody's had a great weekend. I'm pretty sure it's Sunday now, so I hope you've enjoyed your weekend. Have a great week. We'll catch you on the Facebook, I'm sure. All right, bye-bye.